Welcome to the World Free Zones Organization AICE 2020 exclusive keynote, featuring Dr. Mukhisa Kituyi, Secretary-General, United Nations Conference on Trade and Development.
For the audience, our audience of free zones and special economic zones, we know that this is a very, very difficult moment, but the zones have been created under unique circumstances of bringing together skills, finances, and technology to deal more competitively and competently with the challenges of development and growth than the rest of the economies can do. So I think this is an opportunity for the players in the zones to put on their thinking caps and find the solutions that can be copied by others in the global recovery process.
How will trade change after COVID-19?
We've just seen recently a spike in disruptions of global production networks and difficulties, challenges of maritime movement of goods and services, which will mean that we have a totally new dynamic in the period following the pandemic. Acceleration of a process that has been going on since the recession of 2008, which is the shortening of global value chains, partly because of reshoring triggered by economic nationalism, partly because of technological revolution that has made robotics replace labor-intensive production abroad.
How will the COVID-19 pandemic impact free zone trade?
For the free zones and special economic zones, there is a trend that was already in place. There has been a very substantial overproduction of zones. Now, what we see is an initial stagnation because of the kind of recession we're going into will mean that the different free zones will now be competing for a limited space of network production linkages. So we are going to have to see a reinvention of zones as the field becomes crowded and success stories become fewer.
What regulatory changes could help trade after COVID-19?
Our most fundamental underlying phenomenon is a return to predictable rules-based trading system. That multilateralism is going to be important for the global recovery of trade and investment flows. It means also that not only for the free zones, but for the entire global trade regime, we will need predictable conditions to spur a recovery of global trade and investment. This is going to be important. For the zones specifically, we have to go through a phase of soul searching about what are priority sectors, how can we remodel the reinvented free zones to talk to the immediate agenda of a changed world. That has components of embracing more sustainability conditions, responding to environmental and social challenges in the new imperative, and also importantly, looking at areas of economic activity that will be primary to reboosting global trade.
How will the pandemic impact the business approach to sustainable development goals?
The fact that the pandemic we are facing today has no national borders, and that its impact in one part of the world disrupts economic life and predictions in other parts of the world. This pandemic has come at a time when doubters are being reminded about our global interconnectedness. Secondly, the fact that before we have a vaccine, no country is out of the woods until all countries are out of the woods. That the potential of reinfection from areas of the world where we have not had concerted efforts of stopping the virus means that solutions at national level can only be successful in the long term when they're part of a global solution, both for special economic zones and for the global economy in general. We are going to see a recovery that is dependent on putting our act together collectively. And that rules-based system, which was being framed by geopolitics before the crisis, is hopefully one of the main gains coming out of COVID.
What infrastructure will be key in the post-COVID-19 world?
The nature of infrastructure investments that will be necessary after COVID is going to be very, very strongly influenced by one, the pool of capital resources remaining after the expansive use of fiscal resources to deal with the economy, with both the health and the survival of small enterprises and big enterprises in the crisis. Secondly, we are seeing certain forms of travel like air travel likely to take a long-term hit. I think we are over the phase of international cheap air travel. And what it means is that we're going to depend much more than before on the significant scale and possibilities of maritime trade. Similarly, in many areas of the developing world, we'll see that the main levers for their recovery will depend on regional integration. And therefore, integrative infrastructure in developing and emerging economies is going to be more significant than it was in the era where they were so dependent on trade with distant trading partners more than with their immediate neighbors.
Will regional ties help emerging economies of the Southern Hemisphere fare better after the pandemic?
One of the lessons learned by many developing countries from what's happened, particularly in East Asia, is the integration of the Mekong River Valley countries. The countries of Southeast Asia kind of had regional distribution of production networks, which took advantage of competencies of labor, and technology, and capital from the whole pool. Now, this is a major learning experience for other regions like Africa, which will need to create regional investment areas, zones, regional integrated or decentralized production processes in a model that has served Southeast Asia so well. We are going to see that, particularly for Africa, at a time when they are fast-tracking the continental free trade area. And I just see that this is a model that will be very much informing what they do. And I see the same with the Mercosur countries of Latin America, who are purposefully looking on how do we maximize the benefit of regional competencies in a new way of development.
Can regional ties be served well through free zone projects?
Free zones are going to be one of the tools of this process. Like you just see across the world, over the past 5 years, we have seen a dramatic increase in countries that depend on free zones and special economic zones as a major tool or instrument of national industrial policy. Whether it is attracting production for export, or pooling technology for improving quality of production, or graduating from logistics to services supply for international production, the zones are an incubator of the next level of climbing the industrial ladder. And so even as Africa looks and other regions to optimize competencies in their neighborhoods, the zones as an incubator of technology, innovativeness, and upscaling of production processes will remain an important enabler of any ambitions of climbing the production ladder.
What funding can be sourced for free zones after the pandemic?
One of the key drives of public emergency response to the COVID crisis has been to reduce the economic hit of the pandemic. While we're trying to keep people alive, we try to limit the damage of the pandemic on economies, on enterprise. This is to keep them in good stead for the difficult climb out of the bottom of this crisis in the coming period. In most developing countries, governments will so deplete their fiscal instruments through stimuli, through direct subsidies for the vulnerable to keep alive while being kept out of harm's way, that they will not have the necessary resources on their own to invest in economic recovery. So I see going forward an even more enhanced role of partnership between the public and private sectors, more investments driven by private sector, both infrastructural and enterprise, as a way of economic recovery from the crisis.
What opportunities exist now for free zones going through this emergency crisis?
I have seen some zones in Africa, this is where I'm best acquainted with what's happened, that necessity is the mother of invention. With the disruption of global trade, particularly in textiles, footwear, and so on, that were being produced in special zones in African countries, and seeing a quick shift into the production of PPEs and masks and other equipment necessary to control the epidemic. These are demonstrated ability to innovate production lines and make products that are immediately relevant for the populations, for the governments and the countries in which they are. It shows something very, very important. Beyond a repetitive production process of low-skill components of supply networks that has been typical of many zones in the developing countries, we can learn from COVID a more rapid consumption of new innovative production systems, and therefore coming online in faster climbing up the technology ladder is a possibility learned during the crisis that can be carried beyond the crisis. This is what some of us are saying: the more enterprising will not waste the crisis that has come with COVID, and will utilize it to fast track the climbing up of the production ladder.
Will developing countries recover more quickly than developed economies?
The divide between developed and developing is not sufficient to predict who will be able to adapt best. Those who identify the opportunities early, the more developmental states that will facilitate competitiveness and new thinking and a new situation in their territories, are more likely than others to see a steeper rise after the crisis. And that is both in the developed, in emerging, and even in the less developed countries. So particularly in the developing countries, I see a sea of difference between the more innovators who will be the avant-garde of the new economy, and between them and the laggard who will be stuck in the analog mode, who will be basically the basket cases that we'll have to deal with in a social way.
What soft skills will drive success in a post-COVID-19 world?
First, the most fundamental skill is the ability to unlearn irrelevant skills and learn new ones. So those will be best adapted to abandoning what becomes irrelevant, embracing the new imperatives of production, and linking to best practices are the champions of the next phase. Secondly, those states which have government leadership that are more responsive to the imperatives of the moment, taking urgent necessary decisions, building and molding positive synergetic relationship with the entrepreneurs in their territories, mobilizing public and private resources to the most appropriate priority sectors. Those, I think, are the ones who are going to run away with it.